Hi, I'm Paul. For this video, I'm going to talk about the purpose of the ego. Something I've just been having a look into whilst meditating, and it's something I don't really hear too much. So the purpose of the ego, firstly, let's have a look at what the ego is. Before I got really, before I gained the access of, let's say, looking in my mind, I always used to think that the ego was thought. And so just having thoughts was the ego. But then I realized that the ego was the attachment to thoughts. So what I'm referring to when I say the purpose of the ego is the purpose of the attachment to the thoughts. So we could say the control of thoughts, which isn't actually controlling the thoughts, but it is still the control of thoughts. So that's what I refer to as the ego. So when I say thoughts, these thoughts kind of appear as being the dominant thoughts. So, the sort of thoughts that say what I should do, what I shouldn't do. If I did this, I would feel bad, or what I should do tomorrow, how to succeed, how to gain, all that sort of dominant thought. I mean, you can kind of see that type of thought is kind of controlling the thoughts in one direction. So going back to the purpose of the ego, I think firstly we'll have to have a look at the unconscious mind, which I've spoken about before. You see, what's the purpose of the unconscious mind? I mean, when I say the unconscious mind, the types of thoughts that we don't want to see, behavior in the past that we don't want to bring up. You see, it seems that a lot of us believe that the unconscious mind is something that's supposed to be there, like an organ in your chest. But I don't think that the unconscious mind is supposed to be there. In a sense, we created the unconscious mind by trying to block out some of the thoughts and try to focus on some of the more positive or acceptable thoughts. And this is what I refer to as the purpose of the ego. So the ego seems to be trying to keep order of the thoughts, perhaps control the thoughts. So by doing this, it's keeping some of the thoughts unconscious, and some of the thoughts it likes to focus on or stick with, strengthening perhaps a more positive thoughts so they become more easier to focus on, whilst trying to keep all the thoughts we don't want behind, keep them locked away in the unconscious mind. Now, when it comes to the purpose of the ego, it seems that it's got, let's say, two directions. We call this reward and punishment. So let's just say that we try to think positively and we succeed. This would be reward. So let's say I've got a holiday planned next week. Now this makes it much easier for my ego to focus on that, to keep away from some of the bad thoughts. So I could keep myself attached to the thoughts of going on holiday. And it seems this gives some sort of boost of energy. You see, it does kind of give some energy, because you're not wasting all your energy trying to fight away the bad thoughts, to focus on something. If someone calls you good or clever, then it seems to give you energy. But let's say something negative happens and you, let's say, feel shame, someone insults you. It seems that you have a sudden drop in energy. Now, in this drop of energy, I think the drop of energy is because you're now trying to fight hard, now trying to obsessively think, trying to drive yourself away from the negative to try and find the reward of a the more positive thoughts to make sure that the negative thoughts don't come flooding through them from the unconscious. So you can see this in, let's say, OCD. And if you look at somebody who has OCD, let's say that the OCD is about washing the hands and not getting germs, not becoming ill. You see, what happens is the thought process of the fear comes in. I must not catch germs, I must wash my hands, I don't want to become ill. Now this thought process starts getting worse and worse unless you react. So then you go and wash your hands. And it's this washing your hands what seems to soothe the thought. So now you get a break away from negative thoughts. You're able to focus a little bit more positively. So the ego's got more control over the parts of the thought that it wants, or that you want, until the next time round that you touch something you shouldn't. And then these thoughts, negative thoughts, start flooding in. So then, if you question, what is it you're really fearful of? Is it really the germs? Or is it the thought? You see, if I don't wash my hands, this thought is just going to get worse and worse and worse. To me, it seems it's that which is more fearful than actually catching the germs. You see, if you take away thought, then it doesn't really matter if you get a germ, because there's nothing there to make you fearful. So what I think the purpose of the ego is, which is the attachment to thought, is just to attach on to, or to control thought, to keep the unconscious unconscious. I'm sure I read somewhere in psychology that we only use 5% of our brain, which is just more referring to the cognitive function. So we only have the access to 5% on average to our knowledge, to our thoughts, to our past experiences. The other 95% is locked away. Now it's still there, but it's locked away. So this 95% is hidden in our unconscious. Now if you're trying to keep control over 5% of your thoughts, your memories, imagine what would happen if all of a sudden the rest of the 95% came flooding in. That'd be 18 times more overload than what you had in the first place. And I think this is when psychosis kicks in. You see, the ego is trying to keep control of only 5%, or trying to stay focused on 5%. And then all of a sudden an extra 95% comes in. Now you suddenly realize that the reality which I knew was only 5%. Now I can't handle all of this 95% that's coming flooding in. So the idea of spiritual awakening is to try to access the unconscious, rather than just mechanically repeating over and over the same thought process that we've used, the 5%. One of the best ways I kind of find of doing this is just really to, well, I've always said meditate. But even meditation, you're doing grounding, so either focus on your breathing. In fact, one of the things what popped up also in today's meditation was a sudden realization that for so long I was trying to find spirituality. You see, when you're trying to find spirituality or find hope or trying to find another teacher or so on, maybe non-duality or some other technique or so on. You start to cling to it. And then you start putting your hope in it. And then you believe, well, this has got to work. You see, this is within that field of reward and punishment again. So this is in that 5% controlling thought. You're trying to, it's like having a holiday next week. You're trying to focus on the holiday to keep the unconscious locked away. So trying to cling on to spirituality or so on. Trying to cling on to an image, a hope, an idea, the future is all within the field of reward and punishment. And I also noticed for such a long time of me trying to do this and seeing other people do it, trying to cling on to different things. There's some things which have been said, which you've heard right at the beginning. You need to focus on your breathing or meditate. And yet I think that's way more important than you could ever imagine. See, I used to think a long time ago that I was focusing on my breathing. Then my thoughts would come and appear. Then I would try to tackle my thoughts and drift away from my breathing. But I think the breathing is probably one of the best exercises when you learn to see it, or learn how to use it the right way. So if you focus on your breathing, let's say you breathe in through your nose and out through your nose slowly, and you just hold yourself there. Even though your thoughts are still going, just try to hold yourself at your breathing. You start to notice that part of you which is holding yourself at the breathing, and the part of you which is thinking, seems to be some space in between the holding yourself and your breathing and the thoughts. You see, this space is the part which does not belong in the field of reward and punishment. It's from this space that you're able to observe. Perhaps you could pick away slowly at your unconscious mind, or just open it all at once. We could say that it's this space which is a third eye. This space which is away from the ego. The ego is trying its best to pull you back into thought, but not all of thought. Also, the ego doesn't know what's right or wrong, what's good or bad. It'll torture you. Keep on repeating horrible thoughts over and over again, because it doesn't know which thoughts are good and which thoughts are bad. It just wants to keep you in one place, wants to keep the unconscious mind away. It seems to me that depending on how you're brought up from a child, let's say before 6 years old or 7 years old, say at that sort of age, if you've been brought up neglected, always silenced, never properly listened to, and it seems you build up an ego of neglect. So because the ego doesn't know, or the thoughts don't know, good or bad, right or wrong, you just follow a process. You try to find the security in neglect, or in anger, or if you've always been brought up to hope, you'll always drift off into the future. The main part of the video is the ego's purpose is just to try to keep the unconscious mind at bay, and to try to keep order in the thoughts. You see, it seems to get wrapped up in a cycle. We go to the OCD thing, and the thought's trying to tell you to wash your hands so you don't get any germs. You see, you wash your hands, and then the thought starts sinking away, but perhaps you don't get germs. And this strengthens the thought that this is the best thing, this is the reason why you never got any germs. Which then makes the strength of that thought even stronger. Which then you become more controlled by thought. And then strengthens the thought, and you end up going around in a circle. The only way to exit it is to stop and actually look at the thought, which means that you need to have that space. Anyway, I think that's all I've got to say. Thanks so much for listening.